In 1860, Americans voted on a Tuesday. Before the new president even moved into the White House, 7 states had left the country. No army had fired at Fort Sumter yet. No civil war had begun. But the map was already breaking. So did one election break the United States? Not by itself. The vote was the spark, in a room filled for decades with the political fight over slavery. Who could hold people in bondage, whether slavery could expand into new territories, and who would control the government that made those rules. Lincoln's election made many Southern secessionists conclude that they were losing that fight for good. To see why, picture one household in the Carolinas on election night. A father has heard that Abraham Lincoln's name was not even on his state's ballot. A mother hears neighbors say the North has chosen a president hostile to their way of life. Nearby, an enslaved mother knows the politicians are arguing over a system that controls whether her own family can stay together. They do not share the same power, safety, or choices. But the election is about to reach all of them. The ballot itself was strange. 4 major candidates ran for president. Abraham Lincoln represented the Republicans. Stephen Douglas led Northern Democrats. John C. Breckinridge carried Southern Democrats. John Bell ran for the Constitutional Union Party, which hoped the country could avoid tearing apart. Lincoln won the Electoral College, but he did not win a majority of the popular vote. He swept northern states and won no electoral votes in the Deep South. That mattered psychologically as much as mathematically. A president could now be elected by a coalition rooted almost entirely in one section of the country. To many white Southerners, that looked less like losing one campaign than losing their place in the national government. The Democrats had split in two over the question everyone was trying to manage: slavery in the territories. Northern Democrats backed popular sovereignty. Let settlers decide. Southern Democrats wanted federal protection for slave property in the territories. Republicans opposed slavery's expansion there. They did not promise to abolish slavery inside the states where it already existed. But to slaveholders, stopping expansion could still mean containment. And containment looked like a road toward political weakness and, eventually, abolition. This fear had a history. Every new territory raised a brutal question: would slavery enter it, or would it be free? The answer affected not only labor and wealth, it affected seats in Congress, electoral votes, and the balance of power between slave and free states. Compromises had postponed the collision. The Kansas-Nebraska Act reopened it. Violence in Kansas made the dispute bloody before the war. The Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision tried to settle the territorial question in favor of slaveholders, yet made the national argument even fiercer. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry added fear of anti-slavery violence to a crisis already burning. And below every constitutional argument were human beings. Nearly 4 million people were enslaved in the United States in 1860. Their labor was treated as property by the system Southern leaders were defending. Families could be separated by sale. People could not vote on the future being argued over them. When we say the election was about political power, that power had a human purpose: preserving and extending a society built on bondage. Here is the turn that makes the story much clearer. When South Carolina issued its declaration explaining secession in December, it did not mainly complain about a random tariff or an abstract theory. It repeatedly named slavery, slave property, and a Republican coalition it believed was hostile to slavery. The document was written by secessionists, so it is not a neutral narrator. It is evidence of what they said they were protecting. That does not mean every white Southerner wanted immediate secession. There were unionists, doubters, and people who hoped for delay or compromise. Nor did every Northerner agree about what should happen next. But once Lincoln won, secession moved from speeches and threats into state conventions. South Carolina left the Union on December 20th, 1860. In January, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas followed. This was the secession winter. A president-elect watched 7 states depart before he had any presidential power at all. The speed tells us something important. Lincoln's election did not manufacture the conflict in 6 weeks. It exposed that an old bargain had stopped working. For years, national politics had tried to hold together places with profoundly different commitments to slavery. By 1860, the party system itself had fractured along that line. Now, a Republican president had won without Southern electoral support. Secessionists saw a future in which they could no longer rely on national power to secure slavery's expansion or protect it from mounting challenge. Lincoln tried to answer that fear. In his first inaugural address, he said he had no purpose and no lawful right to interfere with slavery in the states where it already existed. At the same time, he insisted the Union was perpetual and that secession was legally void. Those were not small claims. They collided with a Confederacy already forming and with an American fort still standing in Charleston Harbor. The election, then, was not the first shot. In April 1861, Confederate guns opened fire on Fort Sumter. Lincoln called for volunteers to put down the rebellion, and 4 more states later joined the Confederacy. The political rupture became a shooting war. But the answer to our opening question is now clearer. Lincoln did not break a healthy country with one vote. His election was the catalyst that convinced secessionists that a political order designed to protect slavery and its expansion could no longer be controlled from inside the Union. That is why this election matters. The Civil War did not begin over an abstract argument that simply got out of hand. And it did not begin because a single man appeared on a ballot. It came from a long struggle over slavery, human bondage, political power, and whether a democracy could survive a result one side refused to accept. The ballot revealed the break. Fort Sumter turned it into war. Next, we follow the first shots and the decision to fight for the Union.